The crow in your yard brushes the dirt aside and then freezes. Its head tilts almost imperceptibly. The shallow dip it has uncovered is empty. A few weeks ago, it buried a single walnut here. It had covered it with twigs and grass. Now the walnut is gone. The crow does not try to find it elsewhere. It does not call out. It does not search the nearby bushes. It simply stares at the empty hole. Then it taps the ground once with its beak. That single tap feels like a question about nothing. Maybe another animal stole it, or maybe the crow already retrieved it and you forgot. The crow pauses. It doesn't keep digging furiously. It doesn't search the whole yard in confusion. It glances at the hole, then it walks away. But why didn't it keep digging? The obvious explanation is that the crow remembers the spot was empty. But the real reason is far stranger. That crow isn't just flipping through a mental photo album of empty holes. It is thinking about nothing. It is holding the concept of zero in its mind. Zero is not the same as emptiness. It is a number. The number that represents the absence of things. Its existence as a concept is one of the grand achievements of the human mind. Yet a crow, with a brain the size of a walnut, might share that ability. For most of human history, zero didn't exist. Ancient civilizations like the Romans had no symbol for it. They got by with words like none or nothing. But a true mathematical zero requires you to treat absence as a quantity. That mental leap took centuries. Why was it so hard? It finally happened in India, around the 7th century. A mathematician named Brahmagupta wrote down the rules for zero. He treated it as a full number. You could add 0, subtract 0, and multiply by 0. This insight spread through the Arab world and into Europe. But here's the catch. Even with Brahmagupta's rules, 0 remains one of the hardest concepts for the human brain. Why? Even human children struggle with it. A cognitive psychologist named Karen Wynn found that young infants can do basic arithmetic with small numbers, but they consistently fail when asked to represent an empty set. For them, nothing is not a number until years later. So if 0 is so difficult for human brains, how does a crow manage it? Enter a neuroscientist named Andreas Nieder. He and his colleagues at the University of Tübingen wanted to find out what happens in a crow's brain when it thinks about 0. They started with a batch of carrion crows. These are large, all-black birds common across Europe and Asia. The crows were raised in an aviary and trained patiently. The training took months. A crow would sit in front of a touchscreen. The screen showed a sample image. That sample had a certain number of black dots. Sometimes it was 1 dot, sometimes it was 2 or 3 or 4.
And sometimes the sample was a blank screen.
0 dots. Then 2 choice images appeared. One showed the same number of dots as the sample. The other showed a different number. The crow had to peck the matching one. If it got it right, it got a treat. The crows learned to do this with remarkable accuracy. They could distinguish between 1, 2, 3, and 4. But the key question was what they did when the sample showed 0. Would they treat the blank screen as a number or just as a weird outlier? The answer was clear. When the sample showed 0 dots, the crows reliably pecked the image that also showed 0 dots. They didn't just peck at something shiny or at random. They had learned that the empty set is a specific value. It wasn't just nothing in a vague sense. It was a point on their mental number line. Then the team went deeper. They wanted to see the actual neurons that underpin this ability. They surgically implanted fine wires into the crow's brains. The target was a region called the Nidopallium caudolaterale, or NCL for short. This part of the bird brain handles high-level thinking. It processes abstract rules, numerical values, and decision-making. It's considered the avian equivalent of the prefrontal cortex. While the crows performed the dot-matching task, the researchers recorded the electrical chatter of individual neurons. What they found was stunning. Neurons in the NCL were tuned to specific quantities. Some neurons fired most vigorously for the number 1, others for 2, others for 3, others for 4. And then they found neurons that responded most strongly to 0. In effect, the brain had 0 neurons, but the way those neurons encoded 0 was different from the others. For numbers like 1 or 2, the neurons represented the quantity directly. The more dots, the more firing. But for 0, the brain seemed to count backwards. When a crow saw a blank screen, the neurons that preferred 1 dot would decrease their activity. The neural signal for less than 1 became the code for 0. It was as if the crow's brain was mentally stepping down the number line. 1 step back from 1 is 0. This reveals something profound about how minds represent absence. 0 is not an isolated concept like a switch for empty. It's woven into the same fabric as other numbers. It's the natural starting point of a sequence. a place on a continuum that stretches from nothing all the way up. But crows are not the only animals to show this skill. A few years earlier, a researcher named Scarlett Howard made a surprising discovery about honeybees. She worked at RMIT University in Australia. She and her colleague Adrian Dyer trained bees to count. They used sugar water as a reward. They set up platforms with different numbers of black shapes. The bees were trained to fly toward the lower number. If one platform had 2 shapes and another had 3, the bee went to 2. Eventually, the bees understood the concept of less versus more. Then the researchers introduced a platform with 1 shape and a platform with nothing on it, 0 shapes. The bees, without any training for 0, flew to the empty platform. They recognized that 0 is less than 1. They could even handle 0 in more complex numerical tasks, treating it like any other number. How could such different brains land on the same idea? The implication is staggering. Bees have brains the size of a sesame seed. Their last common ancestor with crows lived over 600 million years ago, and yet both animals independently evolved a capacity to understand 0. This suggests that the neural machinery for 0 may be an ancient invention. Perhaps it's built into the very architecture of animal cognition. It might not require a huge primate brain or human language. It might be a basic feature of a survival-oriented mind. So why does a crow need to understand 0? The answer lies right in that dirt patch in your yard. Crows are extraordinary cachers. In the wild, a single crow can hide thousands of seeds and nuts each season. They don't just stash randomly. They remember hundreds of locations for weeks or months. They keep a running tally of which caches they've emptied and which are still full. And when a cache runs dry, the slate has to be reset. The mental note must change from 3 nuts to 0 nuts. Without that update, the crow would dig and dig again in an empty hole. And that wasted energy can be the difference between surviving a cold night or not. So the concept of 0 is not some philosophical luxury. It's a real practical tool for staying alive. It's written into the crow's brain by millions of years of selection. This is why a crow in an aviary can be trained to touch a screen for 0. It wasn't learning a parlor trick. It was using an ancient, innate number sense. The same sense that guides it when it dismisses your empty hand, or when it decides the patch of freshly dug dirt holds nothing of value. So the next time you see a crow, watch how it surveys the ground. It isn't just reacting to movement and shape, it's counting. It's keeping a ledger in its head of what is there and what isn't. And what isn't there can be just as important as what is. Your own brain does this constantly. When your hand dips into your pocket and finds no coins, when you glance at the clock and see 0 minutes left, when you check the fridge and discover it's empty, you are thinking 0. And the neural circuits that fire for that thought are strikingly similar to those in a crow's brain. Convergent evolution built the same solution twice, from the primate line that led to you, and from the dinosaur line that led to birds, 2 separate experiments in consciousness, both arriving at the same profound insight, that nothing can be a number. The crow in your yard, brushing the dirt aside, is holding the same idea that took humanity a millennium to formalize, the number nothing. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel. There's much more to discover.